is Mark Tepsic. And Mark has been in the family office space for over 15 years. He spent the first 10 years of his career as general counsel for a real estate development family that had a publicly traded company where he engaged in real estate development, investment due diligence, startup formation, and wealth transfer initiatives. And then from there, he built a family office platform for a New York City-based investment advisory firm. And now today at UBS, he helps families and family office executives across the US and Latin America build and evolve their family office and governance practices for generations to come. So really appreciate your time, Mark, on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Lenny. Glad to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to start off, Mark, it sounds like you got a really extensive background in the family office space. So, why don't we just start off with your background? How did you kind of get to where you are today?
Yeah. So I kind of did everything backwards. I'm going to be honest with you, because most people don't start out their career at a family office. So I did. I just happened to be looking for an internship during my first summer of law school. Called up some old professors that I had in undergrad, one of which was an attorney in the Cleveland area. And so he said, yeah, sure. We could probably use you. Come in. Let's have a conversation with some of the other attorneys. And so that was the start of my career in the family office industry. I didn't know what a family office was at the time. It was 2008. So pre-financial crisis. I think it might have even been '07 when I had the interview. And so, that was my foray into family office. And I knew I just wanted to do, real estate or corporate transactions, but I had no really idea what that meant. So I ended up at a family office and stayed there for a decade.
Wow, that's awesome. And so when you got into the family office space, what were some of the kind of initial things that you learned quickly about, I think like you mentioned, you didn't really know much about what a family office was. So what were some of the things that you kind of learned quickly about the family office sector?
Yeah. So everybody always thinks family office, oh, you're looking at direct investments. It's all about investing. And certainly it's a big initiative of the family office, right? Whether you're doing it through the family office or you're just liaisoning with external advisors. But there's a whole host, it's like a business in and of itself, right? You've got the back office accounting and administration, you've got trust administration, wealth transfer, estate planning, family members are getting married, right? So you're thinking through the prenuptial agreement process, philanthropy. And so it's really a holistic environment. And so it's much more than investing. And in fact, I would say the majority of family offices are formed not solely to do investing, because families have all this complexity they need to manage. So you think multiple residences, you think domestic staff, you think wealth transfer and estate planning. But a big component of it is also accounting back office, inflows and outflows from like the sources and uses of cash, tracking it all, where it's going. Because without that, you're sort of dead in the water in that complexity. You won't be able to operate or really make decisions. So that's probably the biggest thing, is it's much more than investing. It's a whole host of other initiatives and issues.
No, that's good. And I guess to kind of take it back a little bit here, so in order to kind of create this structure, clearly there's kind of a profile of person, individual, or a family. So, why don't we just start off with, how do you define kind of what a family office is and I guess, what they do? I know there's a lot of different definitions and categories of such. So, curious to kind of get your take, Mark.
Yeah, so the mantra in the industry is you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. And that's somewhat true to an extent, but by and large, it's like saying you've seen one business, you've seen one business, right? So a family office is really put in place for a family to manage all their affairs, right? Like just what I was saying. So you often start with an accounting back office, and then you layer on maybe some investment professionals, maybe a legal counsel, but it's usually, to be honest with you, accounting based. And from there, you're helping a family manage their complexity, right? The family office is really the infrastructure for the family. It's the business of the family. And so again, that can mean multiple residences, that can mean wealth transfer, estate planning, and tax preparation, managing domestic staff, right? Nannies, housekeepers, estate keepers, grounds crew, pilot, yachts, aviation. And so it leads to a lot of complexity. I call it family office island. meaning you could be 5 to 15 people managing, $5 billion, but you're doing it with 15 people. And that's not all investment professionals or all accounting professionals. So you're not like at an EY or Deloitte. You can't call somebody down the hall that only works on that specific tax issue all day, every day for hundreds of different clients. And so you're sort of an island. It's a family office island. And so how do you loop in resources? How do you help the family make decisions? Because a lot of the stuff is ad hoc. So it's really an infrastructure for a family to cut through the complexity, to create transparency, to help them make informed decisions, which are often, investment decisions, but not all the time.
No, that's good. And so what is the typical, I guess, clearly having that kind of infrastructure costs capital in order to be able to do that. So what is kind of the, I guess the net worth requirement or typically that overhead cost that you kind of see on that end?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've seen families with $100 million net worth and they're hiring a part-time bookkeeper. I've seen families with $30 billion and they've got a staff of 120. So what it really depends on is what your goals and objectives are as a family. Yes, the level of wealth comes into play because you don't want to spend too much, right, in building the family office infrastructure if it's gonna like lead to erosion of wealth. And so you're really just trying to build for the average family office, which I'm gonna say is, sub $1 billion, right around $1 billion. Um, the overhead's probably a few $1 million. And I know that's like vague and that's ballpark, but what is the minimal infrastructure you need to make informed decisions and to manage your wealth and the complexity of it like a business? Because like a business, it's, you know what the left hand and what the right hand is doing, the inflows and the outflows, KPIs. You're just able to make an informed decision. When it comes to private family wealth, you've got an attorney over here, you got a CPA over there, you're left to self-manage. You got a life insurance broker, PNC, property casualty insurance broker. You've got all these vendors, all this complexity, all these issues. And without a family office, you're left as the client to self-manage. So how do you build that infrastructure at a family office? It's really taking a step back and saying, here's what you have today, here's your goals and objectives, and how do you create a plan around that for the family? So long story short, try to answer your question of a budget, but our UBS Global Family Office report, will have statistics and data on that. It'll give you basis points compared to net worth, and it's a great resource.
Awesome. No, that's great. So what separates, some of the best family offices that you work with, from the rest of the pack?
Yeah. So on the investment front, it means having a plan and having some governance in place, meaning an investment policy statement, which is the roadmap for your portfolio, right? Um, that doesn't mean you can't deviate from that and make investments in something that you think is going to be that's interesting, or you want to fund an entrepreneur, give him or her an opportunity. But by and large, you have a roadmap that you stick to with the investments. Because I've met a lot of families, or I should say, like wealth creators that are like, I'm like, listen, what do you want to focus on your investments? Like, what are you looking to look at and deploy capital into? And some of them will be like real estate, um, you know, office, multifamily, residential, psychedelics, crypto, private equity. We're going to look at every private equity deal. And I'm like, listen, like to do direct, you should have a domain expertise or rely on a sponsor of which you trust and which that they've got deep research and deep due diligence capabilities behind them. Because otherwise, in the direct space, it's very tough to make investment decisions, in my opinion. There's family offices that look like hedge funds and private equity funds, and those are fully capable of running directs. But if you're just the average family office running with 5 to 15 people and spraying and praying and directs, you're probably not going to be successful. So having a plan, sticking to the plan for the most part, is usually the biggest predictor of success. And the better, more well managed family offices have that IPS in place.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And so I guess that could kind of funnel into the next, thought here where, so when it comes to those direct kind of investment opportunities for family offices, what are some of the main considerations that family offices, should take into account, outside of kind of what you just mentioned?
Yeah, again, it goes back to like what capabilities do you have in-house, either through the family or the family office, to make an informed decision. That means, do you have the staff in-house to do, financial due diligence on the investment, legal due diligence, operational due diligence? Um, do you have the capabilities in-house? And, can you stick to a domain? Meaning like, listen, if you're in logistics, you're a logistics family, stick to that. Don't necessarily deviate from it, because when you start playing outside, think of the investment as a business. When you start playing outside your lane, that's when a lot of family offices tend to get into trouble, right? Again, there might be other reasons for making the investment. Again, you just want to have fun, you want to learn about something, help somebody out. But to do that as a strategy is probably not going to work out.
Yeah. No, and I guess that's interesting. I guess the strategy is important because there's a lot of generations kind of embedded into the process of really building a successful family office. So when it comes to kind of the next generation and those conversations or the transfer to the next generation, where do families kind of go wrong in that process? And when they do engage the next generation, with the wealth or the governance or the strategies.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for a lot of, especially first generation wealth creators, right? Maybe they come from a working class background, blue collar background. They are often afraid of what effect their wealth is going to have on the next generation. And so I think not having some sort of strategy or plan in place, and that strategy or plan, in my opinion, should really be to engage them with the wealth. Don't look at it as numbers on a balance sheet, because it often can be overwhelming, because those numbers represent more than numbers on a balance sheet. They represent relationships, right, and how the wealth was made. And so if you're gonna bring them along and they engage them, think of it, just to make an analogy, like if you want to play good on Sunday as a football team, you should probably practice. And the same stands for a family, right? Like if you want your next generation to be responsible, good, productive stewards with the wealth, you need to engage them with it. You can't expect them to wake up on Sunday and just play a great game, because it's not going to work. Engage them with it, have some sort of plan, talk to people. There are trusted partners out there that they can rely on, or consultants that can help them think through that. And then time's going to pass anyway, so you might as well just engage them with that, just
And
to
is
help understand it.
And is that hesitancy due to, like you said, if the children realize how much money the family has, then they think, is that the concern? They may, go off the deep end or, not
Yeah,
make not make the right decisions. I don't know.
yeah, it's usually rooted in some sort of fear, right? And it usually means, generally, you know, conventional wisdom is like, if they know how much wealth they have, they're not going to be motivated or productive to go out, you know, go to college, maybe get an MBA or whatever, follow their dreams, pursue their passions. They're just going to rely on the wealth. And listen, sometimes that does happen, but in my opinion, if you lead with fear, that's not a good thing. I mean, a lot of these families are bold business builders, problem solvers. Apply that same logic to engaging the next generation, right? So engage them. Don't lead with fear and try to hide it, because that never works out. It might even have the opposite effect.
No, that's good. And so what do you see for family offices within the industry and just in general? I see a lot of headlines where the transfer is happening and there's this massive amount of transfer where the family office space is starting to compete as a real, industry. So where do you kind of see the sector going?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. You do see a lot of headlines like $85 trillion wealth transfer. What does that mean? And or, family office is going to compete with private equity. And so the wealth transfer to me means you're transferring and or creating relationships. You're not just transferring numbers on a balance sheet. You're transferring businesses. You're transferring investment portfolios. You're transferring personal property like art, maybe jewelry, vacation homes. And so what sort of relationships is that going to create amongst the next generation, right? Brothers, sisters, cousins, other siblings, aunts, uncles. Think through that. How are you going to manage those decision making frameworks? How are you going to keep everybody aligned And so when you're doing estate planning, think through that, right? Don't say like this is going to save me X amount on taxes, so it's the greatest strategy. Think through the tax strategy, but also think through what impact and how is what I'm setting up going to influence the next generation when it comes to like making decisions together, right? Because they could be, you're creating essentially shared assets and shared resources when it's transferred. So governance is going to become more important, not less. All wealth will be multi-generational at some point in families. The next is, the private equity kind of the private equity and family office, the intersection. I do think family offices are going to play a more important role. Will it ever rival private equity? No. And the reason for that is what I just said. You're taking assets and you're transferring it right to the next generation. So it's going to become fractionalized. And so is everybody at that family or that family office going to want to do XYZ strategy, which means, we're going to go out and because oftentimes these families held a business together for sometimes generations and now they've got liquidity. They don't have to be partners anymore. Sometimes they want to be partners. That's fine. But that's one reason why it probably won't work. The other reason is okay, let's say a family really wants to do this, because I think families can play a massive role in private equity looking, kind of investment strategies. Then they should do it, treat it like a business, and they, oftentimes have deep operating expertise, oftentimes built over generations. I think they can rival PE in specific areas, right? Will they ever displace PE? No. And the reason why is because you're dealing with individual families. So you might say, okay, well, why don't they just go raise third party capital? Guess what? When you do that, you're a private equity fund. You're no longer a family office. So I think families with deep operating expertise can play a huge role, more than just a financial engineer, right? Like typical private equity. But I think to do it well, you're going to have to raise third party capital. And once that happens, again, you're a private equity fund. You're a private equity GP.
So to that comment, so you can have the model with the family office funneling it now, as a private equity shop. So do you see that happening? The kind of that transition happening from family office to private equity?
It's a trickle right now. I think, listen, you first of all, you have to want to do that as a family,
Mm,
right? And so, do I think there's a big opportunity for families? Yes. Do I think all families want to do that? No. So just because you have the capability doesn't mean you want to continue to do that. But I do think for the right family, right, when everything aligns, I think it could be huge for a lot of families. So that's kind of my synopsis there. So yeah, family offices. Listen, wealth creation is still we're still in a bull market here with wealth creation. Families are going to continue to get wealthier. Individuals are going to continue to get wealthier, and family offices will start taking a more active role in the private equity markets. But they're never going to displace PE because you to do that you're going to have to scale, and to scale you're going to have to raise third party capital. So
right. And so is that, this the deciding factor around, let's scale this into a private equity firm? Is that just a trailblazer in the family that has ambition and energy to go and do that? Or, what is kind of the typical situation where you do see kind of that, strategy change?
yeah, you see that. Sometimes you see even first generation wealth creators that may have sold a business that are like, they sold the PE and they're like, listen, I could do this. And they still have that fire in them and they still want to do it. But to do it right, like, listen, you need to create the infrastructure around that family member or that family. So that includes, how you're going to source the deals, right? Like you need to find the deals. They're not just the good ones aren't just going to come across your desk, especially the control deals. And so how are you going to source them? What's the due diligence team? So you're going to have to invest in this. It's not something that you're just going to say, listen, I've got X amount of dollars. I'm going to go do this. Like treat it like if they wanted to treat it like a business, go create that infrastructure, create a business plan, and say, here's how we're going to do it, right? And have sort of like, listen, this is what we're going to focus on. Because again, I've seen so many family offices say like, we're entrepreneurs, like we're just going to go buy XYZ, invest in XYZ, and without a plan and a focus and a niche, like it becomes very challenging to do. You could get distracted looking at every single deal that comes across your desk.
Yeah. And so I know you make a lot of comments around governance, and you made a comment earlier about, just because it's good from a tax perspective, it doesn't mean that it's still a good decision for the family, and just furthering the goals. So do you have an example kind of a scenario where, that happened, or that you can speak on, some of those mistakes that you do see families make?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat of a generalization, but I think it applies to where families go wrong is, you know, you've got a family business, and listen, most family businesses are liquid. It's not like buying a share of Apple. You could buy it and sell it in the same day for the most part. Family businesses are illiquid, right? They're private. And so when you're thinking through, okay, who's going to succeed in the business, right? Like take it over and run it. Think about also who those investors are. They're other family members. And so do those other family members want to be in business with their siblings or cousins or whoever? Some of them do and some of them don't. And a lot of them don't know, right? The issue becomes, if you're going to run that business, you need a board to answer to, just like a public company needs one. It should be populated with family members, external, outside family members, right? Like some professionals, to help inform the conversation. And you should also think through, like, how are you going to get other family, get family members, the investors, shareholders, liquidity. Um, what kind of distributions are they going to get? I've seen so many families that are like, no, but this makes financial sense to keep all the wealth in the business. We're going to run it. We get great returns. We can't get that in the market anywhere else. Plus, if we sell, we have to pay a huge capital gains tax. Um, yes, yes, and yes, right? That can all be true, but that doesn't mean it makes sense to keep it as a family business, right? Sometimes you need equity to grow the business. Where is that going to come from? It might come from private equity. Should the family diversify? That's a huge discussion among families. Um, and so the governance will help the family. Governance at the end of the day is really just communication, in my opinion. So if the family is getting together and communicating and talking about this, and they're able to make informed decisions together, if you just got one family member saying, no, this is what we're going to do, right? You don't have a say in it, then that's going to lead to problems every single time. Whether that's a good financial decision or not, it does not necessarily matter all the time, because family members want a choice. They want a voice. They want to be able to use their wealth. They just don't want to look at it as numbers on a balance sheet. So what's the point of having $100 million if you can't access it, any of it, right? If there's no distributions being paid out. So getting together and talking, is like the first step in communication. So yeah, the first step in governance. So, you know, it's challenging again for families to take a business and move it throughout the generations, because the family tree is going to get bigger. Family members aren't going to necessarily be aligned. Their cultures might differ, right? Their interests and values, connections to each other. So it's a challenging environment to be in.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you see some stuff in really kind of in the private equity space where you have people buying, HVAC businesses and electrician businesses, and because the commentary is, well, the next generation doesn't want to actually take it and run it. Are you seeing that to kind of in the extent in the space that you're in as well? I think that's more of a mom and pop situation, but I'm
Yeah.
curious to understand, being in the industry for 15 plus years, what's kind of the change, from generations back then to what you're seeing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the years, one thing is, you're exactly right. Like private equity, the industry as a whole has taken on more capital, right? And what that means is, like, the industry's grown, and so you do see, private equity firms, like, on the smaller side, lower middle market, buying and rolling up these small, like, HVAC mom and pop companies. I think it's good, to be honest with you, for the economy, because you're exactly right. Like, if you're going from a mom and pop HVAC company and the next generation doesn't want it because nobody wants to run it from wherever geography they're from, and they just don't want to do that. Like, listen, private equity is, generally speaking, very efficient at what they do, for the most part, and so they're a buyer out there. So I don't necessarily see that. I see it. more in the middle market space, just from, the clients that we have that are monetizing their businesses, going through a liquidity event. So I see it from the client perspective. I don't necessarily see it from the PE. I don't see it from the PE fund perspective, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good. Um, so I do have kind of like a, fire round, it's the family office fire five round where I have 5 questions, just standard for every guest that comes on. And
Yep.
we can kind of go through this, fairly quick. But don't hold back, if you have an extended answer on any of them as well.
Okay.
So what's kind of a common misconception, about your field of expertise that you'd like to debunk today?
I think it is. You've seen one family office. You've seen one family office. I don't think that's true. I think if you're going to have a good, well-run family office, you need to be able to make informed decisions. And so that's an accounting back office. As boring as that sounds, don't talk about the investments until you could talk about having a good, strong infrastructure at the family office.
No, that's good. And what's the most memorable or unusual experience you've had in your professional journey?
Oh man, there's so many of them. I think having been at a family office, it can be a very rewarding experience. I've seen, I was at a family office for 10 years. That means when I started, there was family members were 15, and by the time I left, they were 25, 26. They were sometimes graduated, getting their first jobs, getting married. So seeing a family up close and personal through personal inflection points, which often, sometimes, not all the time, coincided with business or financial, um, was rewarding for me.
No, that's awesome. And it's interesting too because you do, you have conversations with people in the family office space and they're it's always said like well, you need to go work at an Ernest and Young or some other shop and get experience and then a family will take you on. But you've kind of proved that you've kind of debunked that as well. So I'm curious to understand like your advice, for somebody that does want to get into the family office space as a career. Um, if you
Yeah.
had any advice around that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I was just the right place, right time for me. That is not the normal track by any means. I liked it. I probably wouldn't have it any other way. But yeah, you do need, if that's not the normal track. So the normal track is, work at an investment firm, work at, a CPA firm, right? Big Four. Because then you're bringing, capabilities to the family office. I learned at the family office. I didn't learn at a CPA firm or a law firm or anything like that. So it was just different. But that's not going to be the norm. So go get outside experience, or even do an internship for, a half a summer at a family office while you're in college. I think if you want to get into wealth management, there's probably no better place than have some family office experience because it's a true holistic environment, which families aren't just, hey, we've got our investments here, we've got our, CPA or attorney over there. They're always interrelated decisions and issues that have to be considered. And family office is really one of those only places you're going to find that experience.
No, that's good. And so, dealing in this space, there's always a lot of question about the next generation, values, principles, governance. What are some kind of personal core values that, you've implemented in your own life, just kind of, seeing how some of the different families that you work with operate?
Yeah, I one of the one family that I worked for, sort of the acting patriarch there had a mantra, and I think he got it from his father, and so on and so forth. It was family, community, business in that order, meaning take care of your family. That's your number one priority. Your second one is your community, because even if you have an amazing business and you're not supporting or benefiting the community or trying to make your community a better place, the business doesn't matter. So family, community, and then business, and business is exactly what it sounds like. And so I don't have a business, but I myself, kind of, it's kind of my just profession. So that's kind of how I look at things to an extent, and I attribute it back to the individual that I used to work for. I just thought it was a great mantra to live by, and it's very
Yeah.
simple and timeless.
No, that's awesome. And I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but just in simple terms, where do you see the family office space headed, over the next 5 years, call it?
Yeah. So I know that I said family offices won't be a force in PE. That doesn't mean that they're not going to make a ripple, or they're not going to have a place. I do think the more wealth is created, especially when that wealth becomes younger and younger, right? Before it would take generations to build a company, sell it, have a liquidity event, and you may have wanted to ride off in the sunset. Now, I think, the wealth is getting younger, so you're gonna oftentimes they want to stay, build other businesses, make other investments, right, in a domain that they know. Maybe that's tech. So I do think that they will play a more active role in PE, but they're not going to displace PE.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so, for somebody that's listening, a family that's listening, or somebody that, finds this useful for their personal life, how can they get in touch with you, or why would they, get in touch with you in particular? And what's kind of your expertise on how you can provide value for them?
Yeah, I mean, listen, LinkedIn, pretty simple way, but I can help you think through, your infrastructure, help you think through the complexity, where you're at today and where you want to be in the future, and I can help you build that infrastructure to get you there. And if I don't know something, I'm going to go find the answer for you. And listen, I've been in this kind of this complex family wealth space, for over 15 years. And so, I've worked with probably a few hundred families at this point. Some, obviously more deeper than others, but um, I've just been in this space for 15 years. So it's go ahead and find me on LinkedIn if you want.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time. I know I definitely found some value, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. So again, really appreciate your time today.
Lenny, thank you. Appreciate it. Anytime.
Awesome.